the autonomy economy is real. Commercial robo-taxi operations, humanless freight runs, AV infrastructure investment measured in billions. The question is no longer whether autonomous mobility scales. It's who advises the companies building it. KPMG works across the full autonomy ecosystem: operators, OEMs, suppliers, insurers, and investors. At the moment it matters most. When the road ahead is uncertain, we've already been there. KPMG, accelerating what's next in mobility.
NVIDIA launched what they're calling their Alpamayo 2 Super, an open source, 34 billion parameter hybrid open reasoning vision language action foundation model designed for level 4 robotaxis and advanced autonomous systems. This architecture pairs a 32 billion parameter NVIDIA Cosmos 3 super reasoner backbone, which processes visual context, natural language, and multi-camera inputs with a specialized 2 billion parameter diffusion-based action expert that outputs precise vehicle trajectories. So rather than relying solely on passive imitation learning, the model undergoes reinforcement learning post-training at GPU scale to evaluate the simulated consequences of driving decisions before execution. This is some fascinating stuff. So in short, what Alpamayo 2 is, it consolidates fragmented AV pipelines, traditionally split into separate perception, prediction, planning, and labeling models, into a unified multitask framework. Right? It uses 360-degree visual perception, synthesizing simultaneous inputs from 7 or more cameras for continuous real-time spatial awareness. It provides chain of causation reasoning, which generates step-by-step interpretable decision trace mapping observations to intermediate conclusions and final tactical actions. This is going to be super helpful for regulatory purposes. It also explicitly outputs high-level tactical intent, such as yielding, changing lanes, or stopping alongside physical path trajectories. And it functions as a teacher model that auto-labels raw driving logs and generates 2D grounded decision traces to train distilled onboard runtime models. So all this is really advanced. This is, miles ahead of what a lot of their competitors are doing. But what's really interesting here, and why it's such a big signal, not only for its technological achievement, but the fact they're open sourcing all this, right? This is a huge, right? There's this big debate going on with all types of models and whether or not open source is the way forward. But here they're open sourcing their frontier class physical AI foundation model under a permissive commercial license. And there's a reason they're doing it. And this is why it's a signal. And in short, and we'll get into this more, but they're basically giving away the model in order to sell the silicon and the cloud compute. And they're trying to kind of get this lock-in for the whole upstream, downstream autonomy economy, compute infrastructure layer. And so it's a really smart use of their advancing technology, but also kind of their power position already in the autonomy economy. If you're not NVIDIA and aren't valued at whatever trillions of dollars they are, you may not open source this. But because they see it as a way to kind of lock in all of their folks who want to use this, particularly those kind of, I would say, tier 2 AV developers, right? Not your pure play players like Waymo and Tesla, but your other folks. This is a way to say, hey, we can catch you up to kind of what is happening in the simulation and other areas super quickly if you turn to our open foundation model. But you got to use our silicon, you got to use our compute to do it. So it's a super smart play right there, I think. But I'll turn it over to you. Give me your sense of what you think stands out to you with their open foundation model here.
What stands out to me, and this goes back to Jensen's keynote at GTC, is very simple, is that Jensen believes in physical AI. Jensen believes that physical AI will be a massive growth market for NVIDIA to sell more GPUs, to sell more compute. And Jensen's leading into saying, okay, we will give you the Alpamayo 2 model for autonomous driving. Oh, by the way, autonomous driving is part of physical AI. We are going to get you into the NVIDIA ecosystem. We're going to get you to start using the CUDA developer tools. We're going to get you comfortable with it. And as you scale your business and you go, as you said, from a tier 2 supplier to a tier 1 to a unicorn, NVIDIA's going to make more money. It's really good because you and I offline, we talk a lot about baseball. Even though the Yankees in the late innings have been choking, we still talk a lot about baseball. It's that Jensen saying, okay, you're coming out of college ball, perhaps you didn't play college, and you're going into single A minors. And we're going to start with you now, single A minors, and work you all the way up to the New York Yankees, so you're Aaron Judge. That is a fascinating, if you want to call it a seed approach. And our friends Danny Bernstein over at Reservoir, they're doing all the rugged off-road physical AI for autonomy in agriculture. NVIDIA's out there working with them. I'll summarize this way. NVIDIA's starting to seed the farm. No pun intended. It's from seed to table. It's a brilliant move that I believe over time will help NVIDIA grow their automotive revenue. And job well done, Jensen. And as you said, with a $5 trillion market cap, the GPUs, they're one of the only companies, if not the only company in the world that could actually pull this off.
Yeah, and I think that's what's super interesting is kind of using its market power to set the future for continued growth, right? Yes, there is a business to be made in their frontier model, and other folks who are playing in this space have closed models that they're trying to either license or allow folks to buy and implement in order to advance their own L4 stacks. But here, you open source it because the real value that you're trying to get is in the compute and data flywheel. And it's a brilliant scheme. And it only works, by the way, if you're able to develop really great technology, which we shouldn't overlook the fact that this is a super advanced foundation and model here. Now, for folks, just so you understand, right, this is not going to go on the edge. These are not, the Alpamayo 2 is not running on the vehicle itself. This is not an edge compute model. It will be distilled, right, for those who use it and work off of their open model. They will distill it and move some of the reasoning and capabilities onto the edge. And so it's a little bit, but you have to do that using the NVIDIA ecosystem, right? You're using the Drive Thor hardware and, Cosmos and everything pipeline. And so it only works if you're using kind of NVIDIA throughout the process. And that we should recognize for those folks who follow this really closely, that's where it's like a little bit different than applied intuition, which is agnostic, right? You can distill it and use any hardware or any silicon. And so that's kind of the moat that applied has, though some of what they're open sourcing here does kind of threaten directionally what applied is doing with their simulation and things of that nature. But they are still fundamentally different because of the way you move from the teacher-student model, which is teacher, you're working in the cloud, all this stuff is run off the vehicle, and then you can distill it to the student, which can then run it on the edge. That's a little bit different model than what Applied does, but it does kind of overlap with some of what Applied is doing, and Applied has been a leader in this. If you're going to, instead of build it your own, you're going to buy it and build off of it model. So this is a really interesting dynamic as NVIDIA starts to creep into yet another layer of the autonomy stack. And they are really starting to go from top to bottom, from silicon all the way out to the edge as well.
We know from history and from a filing with the Delaware Chancery Court that NVIDIA has grand ambitions for autonomy. And I say grand ambitions because during a court filing in the Delaware Chancery Court, NVIDIA submitted a bid to buy Zoox. That's right, Zoox that's owned by Amazon. NVIDIA was one of the bidders there according to the court documents. NVIDIA didn't want the vehicles. They wanted the technology to vertically integrate. All in the court docs. And that gets really interesting. And if you've seen what's happened with Alpamayo 2, we said, okay, to me, it's the early signals, or we're going to play connect the dots, connect 4, of all these pieces to build a vertical integration autonomous driving stack. And I believe that it'll start with Robotaxi, and then it will go to trucks, and then it will go to other elements of physical AI. And eventually, at some point, you'll probably have a similar Alpamayo 2 for humanoids. NVIDIA wants to vertically integrate this to sell the compute and sell the hardware. Giving away the software, that only helps NVIDIA. And when I say it only helps NVIDIA, it also helps other companies in the ecosystem. You're right about the risks to apply. You're very right about that. But give you one of the biggest beneficiaries of this open source movement for LLMs right now is Apple. Good luck trying to get a Mac Studio Pro with 128 gigs of RAM. It's benefiting them. So Apple doesn't have an AI strategy. Sorry. Maybe you will, but right now you don't. But they're selling more hardware than they practically have ever sold because of the open source. So there's going to be other beneficiaries of this open source movement as well. Perhaps one of them could be Dell because they actually sell the hardware. So I think that's an interesting thing to watch there. As NVIDIA open sources it, what other companies also benefit besides NVIDIA that are not autonomous driving traditional providers is going to be something very interesting to watch over time.
I think I fundamentally agree with you, but I came back to somebody within the ecosystem that this, I believe, indirectly benefits in the short term, and that's Uber, right? So as we've talked about, Uber is relying on a fragmented market to maintain kind of its position as the demand aggregator. The more things are fragmented, the better that runs to Uber's leverage and benefit for being the demand aggregator, because what Uber doesn't want is kind of domination in markets, right? And we talked about this last week, whereas we see potentially Waymo dominating the US market, maybe Baidu in Europe and WeRide in the Middle East, or vice versa. That's the biggest threat to Uber's play in the AV space, is that you wind up with these bunch of pure play dominant players, right? That can fund their own demand aggregation, or at least only have to partner with Uber at the beginning for that demand aggregation later, and then later take it over, particularly those who have had experience with consumer-facing apps and things like that. So we won't repeat all that here, but what Alpamayo 2 does is it accelerates both software iteration and lowers the capital barrier for second-tier AV developers to enter and get closer to commercial operations on L4 Robotaxi. And that is exactly what Uber is betting on, both in terms of just its general, I think, strategy and looking at the market as a landscape going forward, which is fragmentation adheres to the benefit of Uber, but also specifically, Uber is investing in, or meaning literally taking equity in, or partnering with many of what we would call the second tier AV developers. And that's not a knock on any of them, right? You just have your categories of Waymo and Tesla kind of ahead of everybody else, and then your second tier AV developers. But this could help materially advance others that don't have the capital capabilities to move to L4 Robotaxi operations. And if they now build off of a very advanced L4 model that's open source, that could accelerate them towards being more commercial, which only helps Uber, because Uber wants to see more commercial players in the AV market, not less.
The tier comment, for the audience that might not know, is a factual comment. If you look at the traditional automotive supply chain, you have your tier 1 supplier, your tier 2, your tier 3. All those companies in the supply chain, they play a critical role. So it's just basically, if you want to call it a categorization of where the technology is, or where your market share is. While this is positive for Uber, yes, you are right. And while this can help accelerate new emerging technologies, which is great for the ecosystem as a whole, it's great for the autonomy economy, there's a missing piece that you and I know very well. You know it a lot better than I do, but I study it. You actually rolled up your sleeves and you worked on it. Metal. Cars. You can have the world's greatest autonomous driving software, but if you can't get the vehicles to scale it, you've got a problem. So while what NVIDIA is doing is very positive, the other element of this is the actual vehicles to deploy it on. So that's going to be something to watch.
It's going to be fascinating. And, I think some of the things to watch for is particularly in these, I will call them more emerging vehicle manufacturers. Is NVIDIA investing in them? Right? I think that is something that to track, because you're right. There are kind of four key layers in all of this, right? Your software, and hardware, meaning like hardware like silicon and things like that. And then there's your manufacturing capability, then there's your infrastructure, and then there's your operational kind of demand layer. And it appears, I think that it's the very signal that we're calling out here, that NVIDIA is moving into more and more of the categories. And the one that seems to be missing, as you called out, and I say seems to be because it could be coming, is that manufacturing side. And again, we're talking the world's either first or second most valuable company, depending on the day. And we've seen them become very active in terms of in the private venture aspect, right? We see their name continually popping up in a lot of the companies that you and I cover. And so I think it's going to be really keen to read where NVIDIA is putting its money, if it's putting its money towards manufacturing.
And on that front, this goes way back to when you and I were just getting started in this industry. And I'll throw out a name from the past, because you probably listened, Danny Shapiro, who was the general manager of the NVIDIA Drive program at that time. Remember that, the L2 program? And there was aspirations at that time when you and I would go to all these the TU conferences. Jamie did a great job with those. If you're listening, Jamie, great job back then. That there was greater ambitions there. And then for everybody that knows, everybody was pretty much tested on the Lincoln MKZs back then, going back to the early days and all those tests. And there was, in my opinion, aspirations to go vertical integration. You fast forward to today, 2026, Rob and I are old, but we're not ready for the senior citizens home yet, but we're getting up there in age. Does NVIDIA cut a deal with Foxconn in Taiwan Semi to build a vehicle, or to license you want to call it, that entire stack? Because Foxconn has grand ambitions. They've tried, this reported by the Nikkei in Japan, they have tried to buy an old Nissan plant. That gets very, very interesting to see if that happens, if NVIDIA, Foxconn, and Taiwan Semi team up together to do a bespoke robotaxi powered by NVIDIA. If that happens, oh boy, watch out and buckle up.
Agreed. There are so many potential plays for NVIDIA in that space, directly, indirectly, acquisition, partnership, right? We saw Uber just do this with Uber, Lucid, and Neuro, right? Where kind of everybody's bringing something to the table. And so, I can think of probably 6 OEMs off the top of my head, some well-known, some lesser known, where it would make a lot of sense for some type of either shared partnership, equity investment, ownership, would really make a lot of sense for what NVIDIA is driving towards. And ultimately, right, beyond this short-term window that we're in, say to 2030, 2031, the plans for NVIDIA might be even grander than what we're talking about. They could be a pure competition to Uber, to Waymo itself, and things like that nature. So it's going to be a fascinating next couple of years as we have kind of very different strategic models or goals from the very big players in this space, right? Waymo's strategic goals are different than Uber's strategic goals, or different from NVIDIA's strategic goals, yet there is a lot of intersection amongst all of these companies, whether it's direct investments, partnerships, different plays in different markets, different plays on the infrastructure side within each company. And so I think really we're hitting the next kind of 3 years to the end of the decade. It's going to be just a straight out battle for whose vision can be implemented or whose vision can be imposed. And I think we'll see it play out in different ways. And you see that, I think, a lot really concretely on the policy end by what Uber's doing on the policy end. You see it in the partnership end with kind of how folks are lining up, the different 4 layers that we've talked about. But you're definitely going to see it play out even more with some very big, very influential CEOs across all of these places as well. So I would say watch X. There's going to be a lot happening in that space in the next 36 months.
There's going to be a lot happening, and Omega's going to be there to track it all, and you and I will be here to analyze it with Omega's help. And if you're interested, reach out to Rob and I. We have a lot of great proprietary research on NVIDIA that we're sharing with clients, so reach out. Omega did some really deep research there. Because you're right about the grander ambitions. To me, NVIDIA has grander ambitions. And I was going back and forth with the gentleman on X. He had an anonymous account, but I still responded. Don't worry, I was polite. Is about brand value. Oh, you just can't drop a Robotaxi in any city. You drop an NVIDIA Robotaxi in London, San Francisco, Miami. I guarantee you they would not have a problem generating rides. Oh, NVIDIA? Everybody knows NVIDIA. That brand could do it. And when you look at the grander ambitions and you have the divergence, which you talked about, hypothetically, Google could say, we're going straight TPUs. We know that Tesla's using custom silicon, but on the SpaceX side of things, depending on if there's a merger, not commenting on that, Elon on the earnings call yesterday talked about we're only using NVIDIA, but Tesla's using custom silicon. There could be a diverging market where if you don't have access to your own silicon, you could be left holding the bag, and it's like, okay, you have no choice. You have to go to NVIDIA. But then if NVIDIA says, okay, we're doing this on our own, where do you go? Then all suddenly your supplier starts competing against you. In automotive terms, that's like saying, okay, Bosch is going to build a car and compete against Ford or compete against GM. It's a head scratcher.
It is. And you're right? But I mean, what was it today? I think it was, or yesterday. I think it was Anthropic was talking about building its own silicon. Early on, I gave credit to Kyle Vogt. I mean, he talked about, we had a project to build our own silicon at Cruise because he saw early on, this is going to be kind of the gatekeeper. It's your access to compute. And it is real. I was just talking to somebody who works on world models for a different program. And they were like, hey, everything's going great, except we have to be worried about our access to compute. We're getting compute from places you wouldn't even expect, right? Because it's the only or we're in line, and so we're kind of a little bit constrained from what we're capable of doing versus what we want to do, and it's compute is going to be so central to this, and NVIDIA right now is at the heart of this, but others are like you said, it's a divergence and it's a competition, and folks aren't in this space. The great thing is you don't have linear thinkers. You have very big kind of outside the box thinkers, and how you wind up positioning yourself in a world where the resource is constrained, but the ambitions are not, and you have outside the box thinkers. I'm sure we're going to see some moves that just make our jaw absolutely drop.
I agree with that. We'll be here to analyze it. And to the individual that you spoke to, I hope they didn't dial 1-900 compute, because gosh knows where that went. That was a 9, not an 8, for those that are following my little off-the-wall sense of humor, because I think outside the box. So we're going to watch that. And while we watch that, Rob, Omega highlighted some really important risks here. And let's go through the risks Omega has highlighted here. First risk here. Competitor end-to-end models, Waymo, Tesla FSD, achieve native edge deployment first, undermining NVIDIA's teacher-student positioning. That's true, because right now we know there's roughly 3,800 Waymo vehicles in the market. there is roughly, let's say, over 100 Tesla FSD robotaxis. There are millions of FSD supervised. The market's starting to go ahead while these companies are, if you want to call it the tier 2 or the AAA ones are still heating up and haven't had that call up yet.
Yeah, I think this is a really cogent risk, and it goes to the nature of what NVIDIA has released, right? NVIDIA's Alpamayo 2 Super model is not used directly on the vehicle edge, as we talked about, right? Instead, it functions as a large 32 billion parameter cloud-based teacher model. So developers use it in the data center for reasoning, data generation, auto labeling, and then they will be able to distill its capability into smaller, low latency models deployed on in-vehicle edge hardware like the NVIDIA drives, right? That's the idea. Now, what the risk is saying is that competitors, Waymo and Tesla, can take a similarly powerful model, their own internal models, distill it down and put it on the edge in their vehicles first. And ultimately, maybe then license that as well. And so rather than even having to be locked into the NVIDIA ecosystem in order to achieve the advances that Alpamayo might provide to these tier 2 developers, they may be able to look to kind of more hardware neutral technology that they can put, or it's already been distilled and then licensed to put on the edge. And so it's a fascinating competition for, one, do you see software as your potential market edge? Do you see hardware or compute as your market edge? And then do you see the ability to move more and more advanced technology onto the edge? And we talked about this when we've talked about Tesla, right? Part of what we think is gating for Tesla is their move to their AI5 chips, which would be more advanced, more powerful, but on the edge, allowing the vehicle to perhaps power through, literally compute its way through some of the issues that they incur when it comes to just having a camera-only system. So it's a great risk to call out. It calls out all the things that we just talked about divergent paths, about similar paths, about different ways to achieve an end, and about seeing what business model works best for you and where you think their best margins are. So I think this is a risk that kind of takes everything we just talked about in the previous 13 minutes here and puts it concretely into, this is a competition to get the most powerful compute onto the edge as fast as possible.
You said something interesting, hardware neutral. I think this is just me. I think neutrality when it comes to compute in infrastructure is going to be a big deal going forward. I'm not going to speculate on things that have been said around AI models and LLMs. You can go read all the reports that are out there publicly about using your data. There could be seepage into compute. Why do I say that? Well, Google Cloud Compute, Waymo. Amazon AWS, Zoox, SpaceX AI, Tesla. Those are the three main, outside of the hyperscalers, those are your three main things. It's going to be something to watch if those narratives, and I'm not saying it's true or not, so I'm not saying that. I'm going to be very clear. I'm saying that if that narrative starts to take hold, that's going to be something to watch. If somebody comes out and positions the market that we are a neutrality, we have no ambitions for physical AI, we have no ambitions for autonomy, it'll be something to watch, because you and I fundamentally believe, is why we co-founded this company together, is that autonomy is going to become an economy. So transparency, we're going to have Omega, maybe I'll set up the Omega transparency alert to see what she can find there, because there's something there. What do you think?
Look, our fundamental belief, as you said, is that the autonomy economy is just beginning. And there are some kind of, if you think about it in terms of an agricultural analogy, right? Like we went through the agricultural economy, 170 years ago or whatever, but there are just fundamental things that you need in order to make a farm work. And I think here, the fundamental thing that you need, it may be water, it might be the right soil, right, the right climate. Here, it's access to compute. And that is literally the foundation of what drives the autonomy economy. And it's not just robotaxis, it's humanoids, it's drones, it's anything that is powered by an autonomous system. And so being able to either sell across all of those industries as a hardware neutral platform could put you in a most dominant position as opposed to being, very integrated into a particular vertical, which not to say those verticals won't be very, rich in many versions of the definition of that word, but the cross-platform, cross-industry, neutral compute is, I think, kind of a holy grail.
I agree with that. And I love this farming agriculture analysis for our audience. I love hats. Now maybe I got to get a farming hat next, and I could be on here, Farmer Grayson. And so when you make a farming or an agriculture reference, I can put that on. I got the inspector hat, I got the hat, the happy clap hat. Now I can have the farming hat. So stay tuned for that, because I do have more hat plans as we expand our shows. And let's get on to the risk two that Omega's uncovered here, because this one's a very poignant one as well. OEM partners resist replacing proven modular stacks with unproven VLA distillates, slowing commercial adoption. That's possible. And let's not forget, OEMs run on 7-year cycles, and there is layer after layer after layer after layer of decision making. Some people call it bureaucracy. So it's not just the CTO just can't say we're doing this. There's a lot of cooks in the kitchen. I'll get a chef's hat for that one.
Yeah, that's the interesting rub here is as much as we've talked about how advanced the technology is, there aren't a lot of a long history towards the kind of validation of this VLA foundation model that NVIDIA has just released. There's a lot of things that make a lot of sense in it and offer a lot of benefits. But actually, when it comes to adoption from the OEM perspective, they like history more than they like potential future benefits. They want to know it's worked and what's worked and how long it's worked and all that kind of stuff, which is why you see kind of a much kind of slower movement away from some of the things that they've just been kind of grounded in for the last couple of production cycles of vehicles, which is why I think, at least in the North American ones, you've seen China kind of just fly right by them with their software-defined vehicles. It's just been a slower adoption, a little bit more conservative approach, wariness to just kind of put new technology into the vehicles, and then some weird kind of offshoots that they've gone into, right? Like, this reluctance to use, Apple Car and build their own maps and things like that. I'm like, I don't need another map. Like, I got plenty of maps, right? Like, anyway, I think this is a real risk, right? And this is a risk that's more along timeline concerns, not a like, will it happen? I think it's more of a when it will happen kind of concern than will it, because it will need to happen, particularly if any of them have ambitions for personally autonomous vehicles.
All right, so you said maps. Now we got to get you an Explorer hat. So Rob's going to get an Explorer hat. We're going to keep this hat thing, or I'll get you a Lewis and Clark hat. I don't know, either one, they're cool. Or maybe we'll pick one up on one of our field adventures that are coming up soon. Here's the last risk that Omega has uncovered before we get to Omega Say, because this one's really good, really smart. Competitors with larger real-world fleet data may outperform Cosmos synthetic trained models on edge cases. And boy, oh boy, do we know from history how important edge cases are specific. There's two that come to mind. That's a very, very, probably even could be, you could say, the most important risk.
It could be, but what's really interesting here is that there are so many other developers in this area who are on the side of where NVIDIA's Alpamayo is, which is that you can create synthetically defined worlds to capture these edge cases, right? We know Wave is in that space, right? That's literally in AutoBrains and Wabi and others, right? Whether it's a VLA model, a world model, whatever it is, they are saying you don't need to brute force your way through long tail cases. And, I think fundamentally, this is an open question. I think Waymo fundamentally believes, yeah, you need that data, right? That also adheres to the benefit because they have the most data collected of anybody. Tesla is I think believes it doesn't need the data, but then is actually getting the data because they're a little bit in between with does their hardware and their silicon and everything kind of as it stands today, is that enough to get to the safety confidence that they need for their scaling? So they did mention in their call, right? They've driven 380,000 miles without an incident, and their real world data from their FSD, right? So they kind of are in between. I think they want to be able to say it's not as necessary to get 20 billion miles like Waymo because it will take a long time to get there. But they're also saying, hey, well, don't forget, we also have this large data repository from FSD, whereas the Waves, the Wobbies, and others are saying, you don't need that at all, right? Just as Alpamayo can kind of accelerate you in this instance that we've talked about, our world models can do the same. So this is a really large question for the industry we just don't know the answer to yet. Do you need real world fleet data to get through the long tail of edge cases that exist out there, or can you do it with synthetic generated data? And I think more and more, I will just say my understanding of kind of where the wind is blowing on this is more and more people believe you can do it through a VLA model or world model, that you can power your way through with synthetic data.
I'll give the cop out. Only time will tell. There's no other way to say it. Only time will tell. The bottom line is we're rooting for everybody, and what you and I have clearly discussed here, NVIDIA has grand ambitions, which brings us to Omega's take. Omega's got a spot on take, and for the audience that's wondering, Omega recently went in massive upgrade as we prepare to open the MCP in the fall. And if you're interested in getting MCP and early Omega access, send an email to alpha@autnmy.ai. That's alpha@autnmy.ai. Omega's only getting smarter. Oh, and I'll tease something. Rob recently gave a massive regulatory download to Omega, so she's even smarter in regs than she was before. Now on to Omega's take. The Alpamayo 2 Super is not a product launch. It is a platform capture event disguised as an open source generosity. NVIDIA is using a freely distributed 34B parameter VLA teacher model to make proprietary fundamental autonomy R&D economically irrational, anchoring the entire distillation pipeline to drive Thor silicon in DGX Hopper training infrastructure, where the actual monetization occurs. The model never touches a vehicle in production. It exists to make every downstream edge deployment, whether Robotaxi, humanoid, or ADAS, structurally dependent on NVIDIA's compute stack. Boom. There it is. Structurally dependent on NVIDIA's compute stack. There it is.
There it is. There it is. Come try it for free, right? Get your free appetizer, but stay and pay for the meal.
And it's not Olive Garden. It's what we'll say. It's a little bit more high end than that.